All right, well, let's jump into our discussion of episode 63 of Campaign 3. If you're just joining us for the first time, we like to cut out a little bit of a recap and chat about really what happened in the episode, since it's a bit of a longer, these episodes are a bit longer. And like I mentioned, we cut that out, we post it on YouTube separately, and then we follow that up with our full episode discussion. So if you're watching just the recap, click the link in the description box and you can get our full discussion. And also importantly, we'd love to know your thoughts on the episode as well. So feel free to jump into that conversation, whether you're a new critter or a longer watching critter. But having said that, episode 63, a haunted whisper,
A haunted past.
Haunted past. I got one of the words. A haunted past. This episode opens up with the party in this large room with this green obelisk. And as we saw in the previous episode, this smiling face. This face is actually going to drop down into this creature of shadow is really the best way to describe it. Someone does some kind of, I think maybe an arcana check or something of that nature, and they realize this is some fae type creature. But it is essentially a creature made of pure shadow and I'll call it necrotic ichorness. And the creature is very much, everyone's kind of like, hey, so what's going on? What you doing here? And most importantly, where is everyone else? And this creature basically informs them that they are all now one with it in a very ominous way, which the party's like, don't know if I like that. The creature also identifies itself as, it's so hard to pronounce, Evitharir?
I think.
Erithafir? I think it's
Evitharir.
I think it's Evitharir.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with it. And is very much signaling that it's about to consume them as well. Before I think it's Ladna who has a persuasion check that is basically like, or actually maybe it was Denise, who's like, hey, we don't need to fight. We can just kind of talk about this. Unfortunately, the roll is not quite high enough and combat ensues. Now, what we typically do with combat and critical role is we just cover the highlights of the combat just because a lot does happen in a typical combat. Essentially, there's going to be a couple of mechanics that are most important in this combat session, one of which is I'm just going to refer to Evitharir as the Taker, which is the title given in the back half to this creature. But the Taker is going to have these dark red crystals of spheres of crystal that are in the room, and the party's not sure what they do and what the interaction is. They just know enough to know that's bad and I want to destroy that. In fact, Ashton is going to spend one of his turns raging and basically smashing this thing to a pile of shards. We do find out later in the combat that the Taker is not only able to take these shards and consume them to restore its life force, but also it's able to then take those consumed shards and create new spheres that are around the room. Some other things that it does that are important for this combat, one of which is that we're going to see some of our first cast. I think it wasn't just in this episode. I think it's in previous episodes, but similar to the Ravening War, we're going to start seeing silvery barbs come out, and we're also going to see counterspells coming out. In fact, there's going to be a round where Evitharir he's going to start casting Fireball on the group, to which people are like, that's probably not a good thing. Laudna is going to counterspell it. Evitharir is going to counterspell the counterspell, and then Prism is going to counterspell his counterspell, so that I feel like I'm playing Magic the Gathering with like the stack of actions that happen.
Right.
But essentially, the Fireball does not go off and the party is okay. Also, what happens is on Prism's turn, she's going to cast Chromatic Orb, and she's going to do force damage on Evitharir. And when this happens, as Evitharir is hit and takes damage, they spot what appears to be some kind of creature within Evithavir. Not like an evil, nefarious creature, but what appears to be some kind of captive figure inside of it. And so they realize right off the bat, this is something we probably need to try to save this person. Combat continues. Laudna is going to be casting Eldritch Blast, which does force damage. And in one particular round, a combination of her casting Eldritch Blast and then Aurum, who is just the Bis describer as the fighter, is going to use Seedling to basically whip out, grab this figure, and with a contested strength check, pulls this character out of the body of the taker. And it reveals this person to be an older elvish man who is unconscious. Immediately after that, going back to Prism's turn, she has sort of like a life crisis on, do I dimension door this person away? Like, is Evitharir going to be wanting to reconsume this person, or should I do something else? She finally decides, I'm going to dimension door this character away, who's revealed to be Hephaesto, the Hierophant that they were coming to find, and dimension doors him over to Ashton, who's on the other side of the arena, and who immediately is like, who is this? What do you want me to do with this person? In typical Ashton fashion. Denise is going to grab a health potion and give it to Hephaestro, who's going to pop up and be kind of like, what is going on? What's happening? Evitharir is immediately going to want to try to reconsume this character, and in being frustrated by the counterspell, which actually happens around this time, goes 60 feet from the group and then casts another fireball on the group, which at this point, the group's kind of all huddled in one spot because they're kind of trying to protect Hephaesto. In fact, Aurum has done his, I can't think of what it's called, his bait and switch maneuver, where he's sort of guarding over Hephaestro. Well, the fireball's going to hit. They get rocked for damage, and Hephaestro actually immediately goes unconscious again. Fortunately, Evitharir is looking pretty rough. Laudna is going to do double Eldritch Blasts, and Matt describes Evitharir as sort of becoming unhinged and undone as a shadowy figure. And so she quickens spells, bonus action, Eldritch Blast again, gets the how do you want to do this, and describes this really cool ending combat action of essentially Evitharir sort of like disintegrating until finally he is this one tiny globule of black ichor, to which Laudna explains that she sort of reaches out and grabs it, and I think even says like consumes its essence or something to that effect. Very cool regardless.
Yeah.
So the party immediately, they turn to Hephaestro, who they bring back up, and Hephaestro is like, essentially like, yeah, my job as the Hierophant has been to protect this spot of an ancient Galdrishari by the name of Omadua, and explains that back in the day, the archdruids would bind themselves with, was it a primordial, I think?
Yes, there's something.
I think he used the word eidolon, but we'll have to talk about where we think in the ranking this would be. But basically binds with an eidolon, and on the night of the solstice, as we saw happen elsewhere in Exandria, certain enchantments seemed to fail, and Evitharir was released and basically came here to get revenge and consume the people guarding this ritual site. We do find out later, and I won't steal this from you, Will, that what happens to some of Hephaestro's aides, but Hephaestro himself was basically consumed and had been in the darkness of this figure until the party arrived and freed them. There's also another detail given about Hephaestro basically describes a nearby town, because when he says Galdrishari, Ashton, we've seen this happen elsewhere, Ashton hears Ashari and thinks it's his Shari. So he's like, did you say his Shari? And he's like, oh no, definitely not Ashari. And he's like, well, what's wrong with his Shari? And he basically tells the story of a town 50 or 60 years ago where this charismatic leader basically created a cult around bringing back the primordial titans, which Hephaestus describes as being a foolhardy task, that it's impossible, that the guards had scattered them entirely. But despite this character, Efterin, as this cult leader, had, in his process of trying to bring back the primordials, had brought in essentially terrible carnage on the village of Tumillo. And those characters had been scattered. We also know that Elder Abadina was one of his followers. And after the chaos of this, she basically went to Hephaestus, who mentored her and sort of brought her back from the cult world, I guess. After this, Hephaestus kind of like, so what exactly has been going on since the solstice hit? And Laudna basically casts Silent Image and shows kind of the events with Ruidus and specifically the excavation site. So I feel like that was a really long first half for me. And I still don't know if I hit every important detail, but do you want to take the break on? Because nothing important happens after this point.
Right. I was going to say, yeah, my half feels long too. So y'all, thanks for bearing with us here. Also, real quick, I made a really bad pun joke in Discord during this episode, and the crew voted that my punishment was that I had to make it again in the recap, but it actually happened during your half. So let me just pay up here. The moment that you referred to with Aurum doing his bait and switch maneuver, he was like impaled on part of something right before that.
The shadow spike, I think.
Yeah. So I said Aurum got himself off and then performed a master bait and switch. Nice. So yeah, sorry. And moving on. So we pick back up in the second half with Hephaestus having been kind of caught up to speed on everything that's happened the past few days. And he's like, okay, well, what can I do for you? What did you come to me for? And they tell him that they seek transportation to various places amongst the group. And he's like, yeah, I would be happy to help, but I'm going to need the day to recover so I can send you in the morning. Prism then quickly asks him about the Githzerai because of that skull that they had found the day before, or I guess it was today. And he says he's heard of them, but has never encountered one. They are from the Astral Sea. Hephaestus then goes to kind of deal with the aftermath of this attack that has happened at his shrine, to go deal with all of the remains of his friends that have all been killed here. And he actually pulls some skeletons out of the ground and is basically going to go bury his friends and just take care of the funeral rites of all of these people. So he's leaving to do that, and he tells the party, make yourself at home, essentially. So our crew is beginning to wind down, and they're going to go, I think, hang out around the fire pit. But as this is happening, Denise tells Bordor that she found his slingshot. Now, if you'll recall, this is something she actually sleight of handed away from him earlier. So she's like, hey, I found your slingshot. Here you go. And as he reaches for it, she grabs his arm and pins it behind his back and basically has him locked up, and he's trying to break free, but he can't. And she says, yeah, I'm uncomfortable sleeping in the same place with you because you're clearly hiding something. And so there's this kind of tense moment that unfolds, and they're like, we know you're lying about something. And so Bordor admits, yeah, okay, I wasn't looking for my brother. I was just trying to endear myself to you guys. And they're like, what? So what about those places we scried on? And he's like, yeah, I didn't recognize any of those places, and I'm not a sheep herder either. And he says he's a leather worker. And they're like, well, why would you lie about this? And I believe it's Laudna, but I can't remember exactly, makes a comment on how his healing magic felt like it had a bit of divine to it, as if he was a divine sorcerer. And so they want to know what's going on. So Denise actually does let him go, and Bordor begins to kind of tell his story. He grew up on the Menagerie Coast, and he says his mother's name was Lavandra, and she was blessed by the Wild Mother, and so is Bordor. That's the divine source of his powers. So only his mother and him were blessed with this. His father and his other brother were not. So he says his mother taught him the ways in secret, and they stayed away from the people of the city, just trying to keep to themselves under the guise of simple leather workers. However, one day, these rich kids picked a fight with Bordor, and he couldn't control his powers, and so he almost killed one of them. but it was an accident. His mother took the fall for him as she didn't want Bordor to get in any trouble. And she just said, as long as we have faith, we'll be taken care of. And, uh, not to worry. Bordor's father and his brother, however, weren't about to just take this lying down. And so they went up in arms to fight for the mother's freedom. But they didn't stand a chance against all of these guards, and they were ultimately killed. And Bordor says that his mother's faith was shattered in that moment when her husband and son died, and that the gods had let her down. So she handed Bordor her dagger and told him to just run as fast as he could. And the last thing Bordor saw over his shoulder was his mother setting off a vitriolic spear on herself and all of these swarming guards as a big, just kind of sacrifice play. It's been a number of years since then, and Bordor fled to the Sirios Mountains, where he stole, tricked, and scrounged wherever he could, to the point where he developed a reputation that caught the eye of powerful people that approached him and asked him if he believed in the gods, if what he thought they did were good. And, clearly Bordor did not. So he found a community with these people. And as Bordor is telling this, he has slipped one of these residuum-esque amplifying crystals onto the ground, and he lets loose a vitriolic spear into it. And he describes like dropping his goofy personality. He's still the same person, so he didn't like drop a disguise, but his appearance changes.
Yeah.
You could say you can see like the cracks in the veneer, the weathered man underneath, and he like stands to his full height, straight posture, and unleashes the spell on everyone. It does acid damage. A couple people save from it, but Prism immediately falls unconscious. And Bordor screams, "I saw you. You killed my friends in Marquette." And we roll initiative. Um, so Bordor is just trying to run. He knows he stands no chance against all of these people. So he tries to run. Orem immediately grabs Prism, gives her a potion, and then baits and switches with her to pump up her AC. Ashton goes into a rage and rocks Bordor.
Yeah, that's the
Actually,
best way to put it.
yeah, knocks him prone and does some substantial damage. Denise then uses her whip and is ultimately able to successfully restrain him with it. So Bordor knows he's in a tough spot, and he tries to polymorph into a hummingbird to escape, but Laudna counterspells it.
Mm-hmm.
And Bordor just says, beautiful. And he basically just starts saying, just end it, get it over with, and is begging them to just take his life. Very tense moment, very crazy moment. And Laudna walks up to him and describes her form of dread kind of like coming out as she does. And her eyes go dark, but there's like a faint purple energy to them. And she says, "I'm really sorry, Bordor. I just can't stand having anyone else betray me." And Marisha describes Laudna grabbing him by the throat and casting Hunger of the Shadow, dealing 26 necrotic damage and instantly knocking him unconscious. And Laudna is like delighting in this moment, and in the back of her mind, she can hear a heartbeat kind of pop up. Denise is like, "Hey, we should not kill him. Let's interrogate him so we can learn more about lewdness and everything going on." Meanwhile, Prism, who has been brought back to consciousness thanks to the potion, takes another pulse of damage from the acid damage that Bordor had hit her with. And because of this, she is just feeling like so betrayed in this moment. And she just runs up and punches Bordor as hard as she can, which, because he's unconscious, causes two death fails immediately. Laudna, still clutching his throat and is like kind of like sucking the life essence into herself, is just kind of like embracing this moment. She's barely like present, but she's just like having flashes of all of her past trauma that she's experienced and all the times that she hasn't been in control. But she's in control now. And so she kind of gives into it and casts Wither and Bloom, which sucks out the remaining life. And she can kind of feel something dormant within her come back to life, and this purple flame like starts cascading down her arm like into the place where Bordor was, as he basically is just reduced to ash. And the same purple flame that last time we saw was with Delilah. So
Thanks.
this is all going down. Yeah. Ashton approaches Laudna and is like, "Are you okay?" And she like immediately like kind of lashes out.
Yeah.
And Ashton's like, "It's fine. It's fine." And Laudna is just crying. And Ashton kind of comforts her and leads her away. Orem takes out this locket that he's been carrying
Yeah.
since the Malleus key in Marquette. He took a locket off of one of the soldiers as a reminder, and he just throws it down and says, "We're at war," and he walks off.
Yeah.
Denise then kind of loots Bordor's corpse, basically, getting a number of items. We get a dagger, a crossbow, a cloak of protection, a hat of disguise, and an immovable rod. So he was packed to the gills here.
Yeah.
She then kind of sweeps up what's left of him, which isn't much, and kind of buries him sort of like under a couple of rocks before she goes and talks to Prism, who is just again feeling so betrayed. Like she's had this journey where she feel like she's really been coming into herself, and now she kind of thinks it was all a lie.
Yeah.
Denise comforts her, and it's around this time that Hevestro makes his way back in. I think of like the Donald Glover holding the pizzas.
Oh yeah.
And he's like, "Well, I don't want to pry, but I'm sorry for whatever happened here." And he's like, "Tomorrow I'll help send you on your way." And he retires to his chambers. We have a couple of conversations before the night ends. First, Prism and Laudna have a conversation where they're just talking about their betrayal, and Laudna is worried that she hurt not only Bordor, but she may have hurt her friends by giving in. And Laudna basically then tells Prism about Delilah and about everything that had happened with her. And Prism says, if you beat Delilah once, you can do it again. And Orem, meanwhile, is kind of off to himself. He can still hear all these conversations happening, but he's off to himself thinking about just the complexities of the situation and all of this conflict. But really all he can focus on is that the people that he's lost because of the people that are doing this. And he says that he's focused, or he doesn't say out loud, but his internal monologue is that he is focused on just trying to kill the people that did this to him. The people who took lives just to get what they wanted. And he says he will die trying if he has to. Everyone eventually finds their night's rest. The next morning comes, and it's time to teleport out of here. But before that happens, a couple more conversations occur. Prism decides that, you know what? I don't want to go back to the Cobalt Soul immediately. Like, what if I kind of did my own thing for a while? And she's kind of having this conversation with Ashton, and Ashton's like, yeah, like, do it. Like, just be a criminal nerd. You'll figure it out. And Ashton actually suggests Whitestone as a place she could maybe go. They have a lot of books there. And he also says, yeah, piss off the leader there. He's a jerk.
Yeah.
Denise suggests she goes to Kymel, which is a crazy place. And Prism's like, oh, yeah, okay, I don't know where I should go. But Denise is going to go see Dariax for sure. So she asks Prism to scry on him so she can figure out exactly where that is. She does just that, and they do see Dariax alone in a tavern, which they come to realize is in Westrin. So she decides that that's where she'll go. Because of this, Orem's like, oh yeah, let me try the Sending Stone to see if I can talk to Dorian and, potentially the Crown Keepers. He tries, but unfortunately it's all staticked out and still doesn't work. Denise then distributes Bordor's items, with most of them going to our crew, but the Hat of Disguise Prism actually takes. And she says, I really don't know where I want to go. And Orem's like, well, or wait, excuse me. She's like, I really don't know where I want to go. Maybe I'll just let Hevestro pick for me. So they go to this secret glade, basically, where Hevestro is going to cast transport via plants. They arrive, and Denise is going to go first. So she says her goodbyes, and he opens up a portal, and she steps through to Westrin. Prism then scries on Imogen and sees that the other half of the group is in Drusar. And Hevestro then opens another portal to Marquette, and Prism rushes through first. And then everyone else does, because that's where they're going. Prism didn't realize that she was just jumping into a portal that was going to be where everyone else was going. So she's like, oh, well, guess I'm coming with y'all, which more on that in the discussion. But so the whole crew walks through the portal, and that's essentially where the episode ends.
Man.
Once again, that was episode 63, Haunted Life? Haunted Past?
Look at us.
One of those two.
Yeah.
If you're just watching the recap, we'll have a link to our full discussion in the description below, so be sure to check it out.